I signed with a stylist. Yeah, blue faces blowing up. Yo, like I know a lot of people praying for my downfall, but the only thing that I'll be down for is being top 5, but like down 4. I'm down to earth like the ground floor, but I've been flying so long, I tend to ask people, what's the ground for? Man, I'm only headed up, see my flow volcanic, this the fire I erupt. Heard the fans getting rowdy cause they haven't had enough. You know I'm running the city, you just running out of luck. Yeah, I said that with my chest, I flow hard, it's no wonder they easily impressed. I'm so far, but I'm always coming back with something fresh, I never rest. Where you'll never catch this ego in a nest. I invest my time in a booth, I find a piece. I used to piece the boom in my mind. My ex knows this, let me expose this. She left cause she don't wanna be with an explosive. Man, I'm just feeling so tall I could give a high five to the pilot. Yeah, family tight, I keep small circle like eyelid. Whoa, inbox full of contracts, I signed with a stylist. Yeah, blue faces blowing up like violet.
Even one person can make a huge difference. In this session, we are showcasing a number of activists who have and are continuing to make change in their communities through inspiring hard work. Every journey has its ups and downs, especially when it comes to advocacy. These individuals will share their challenges, successes, and how they contributed on all levels ranging from local to global. Let's hear the stories of these amazing people. During the session, remember to listen out for answers to your board game.
Welcome to the session entitled Making Waves, Individuals Making an Impact. My name is Shaman Mohammed Jr. I'm the founder and president for Let's Stop AIDS. Thank you. This session is not for individuals who just talk. These are individuals who don't just walk, they run. These are individuals who've made change in the world and are already making changes in their community, whether it's local, national, or global. Speakers here will share their stories, highlight challenges, successes they faced, and we're excited to share their stories. Today, we're going to be hearing from a very select group of individuals to share their stories, and at the end, we'll have a moment to have a bit of a conversation with each other and have some moments for questions. I wanted to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask questions, please feel free to use the Hopin app or see around for a microphone if you'd like to ask questions closer to the end. Finally, I'd like to send a reminder that if you're in need of caffeine, especially because we're hitting sort of that mark, there is free coffee at that machine near the fridge for those in person. For those at home, hot water, stretching, any sort of thing efficient will really help to get things going. And right after this, we have a wake-up session too, so it should be great. So first, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is going to be a pre-record, named Jessica Wynn Whitbread. She's an artist, activist, academic, and at times a professional. Most famous for the session, most famous and memorable for creating the campaign No Pants, No Problem. These are parties that have been held for the last 20 years. I was fortunate to go to Jessica's last No Pants, No Problem party that was held in Montreal. And before we kick it off to hear Jessica and her speech, I wanted to ask, have any of you guys been to the No Pants, No Problem party? Few of you, yay. So it's a bit of a fun party and can get pretty wild. So I'll hand it over and we'll hear from Jessica.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm in Bulgaria. My kids wake up early. This is late. So I am honored to be here on this panel with these amazing other speakers. And I'm supposed to talk about, some things I've done to make change, give you advice. Okay, let's go. So projects that I've done that you can, read about is No Pants, No Problem, and Underwear Dance Party to challenge norms around gender, sexuality, and HIV. That lasted 18 years. Actually started in Montreal and then ended up all around the world. Kind of everything. From basically starting off with, I wanted to hook up, I wanted to feel normal, I was young, to I'm having a party in Amsterdam with 1,200 people and a kissing competition. Wow! Beyond my wildest dreams. Considering when I was first diagnosed, I was so scared to kiss someone. Another thing that I've done is poster virus, and poster virus I did with Alex McClelland and AIDS Action Now. AIDS Action Now, check out Canadian history, is in particular like Ontario, but is a direct action group who really did awesome things starting at the beginning of the epidemic in Canada, and really created lots of the institutions and organizations today, whether it be Katie, PWA, CTAC, Voices of Positive Women. Some are not around anymore, but they're important nonetheless. PASAN, working with prisoners. The one that I actually want to talk about a little bit is Love Positive Women, and Love Positive Women is a holiday to celebrate women living with HIV and gender diverse folks in your community. So this is where kind of like advice will come, and it's basically like, you have an idea, just try it, just do it, if you see a need, fill it. Love Positive Women started because I had lost some friends, and friends who had taken their own lives. I was seeing a lot of hurt, a lot of sadness within my community. I work mostly at a global level these days, and I have been for the past 10 years. That's how I know some of the speakers. And I really, in particular, found that in like around February, after like holidays, that's when depression really peaks for a lot of folks, especially folks who aren't feeling loved, and you get something like Valentine's Day and it really sucks. So yeah, I was like, how do these days start? How did World AIDS Day start? How did, what's another day, like International Women's Day, and so on. And it starts because someone says there's a need, something's important, we need to amplify it, and that's what I did. So every year for the last 10 years, this will be the 11th year, from February 1st to the 14th is 2 weeks of loving positive women. So the call to action is, if you're a woman living with HIV, how are you going to love yourself? And what does that look like? A bubble bath? Are you going to take one of your sisters out for dinner? Are you going to, read a good book? Self-care. And if you are a community, like an ally, I was going to say community member, like ally, partner, lover, ASO, I don't know, person, how are you going to show women living with HIV and gender diverse folks in your context, in your communities, how are you going to show them that you care and that you see them and celebrate them? So I can't, I'm going to really try to do this in less than 2 minutes, but what if you let communities lead and you give them space? It's not even giving them space, but tell them it's okay to lead. It's incredible. So events people have done, anything from bringing the children to women who are incarcerated to visit as a surprise in Malaysia, to hand-making cards in Jamaica, or foot massages at the clinic in Barbados. What else? It's soap-making workshops in Nigeria, sex worker dance parties in Kenya, Oh gosh, there was so many in Ukraine last year. There was craft making. There was popular theater, all to celebrate women living with HIV. Last year, there was also a letter writing campaign that young women in Latin America did for their moms who, they were all kids born with HIV, and they wrote their moms who are activists these letters telling them how much they love them and have inspired them. Actually, Barbara did something so amazing last year with moms and daughters, and yeah, that made me cry a bit too. It was really beautiful, and if you give her a second, she can tell you briefly. But so it started really, any of these ideas I ever had were a tiny, tiny seed. And, one of the promises I made to myself, because the cool thing about living with HIV is that you realize that you're mortal and you're going to die. So my thing was always, okay, we have limited time. We're told that, but we don't believe it. So we think we're immortal forever. And yeah, I was like, okay, well, if I have 10 years, I need to make the most of it. So whatever in life I want to do, I'm just going to do it and say, fuck it. So that's what I did. And I still live by that today, even though, I'm obviously living longer than 10 years. But my advice to you is, if you have an idea, if you want to make change, do it, try, it won't hurt. All right. Thanks so much. I kept it pretty close to the time. Bye.
Thank you so much to Jessica for submitting that. Well, part that really resonated with me was that bit about the tiny seed that's starting it and seeing that sort of project grow, which reminds me of one of the projects that we're working on at Let's Stop AIDS. But to keep moving on, I'd love to welcome Skylar. Skylar is a First Nations Cree, and his family lineage comes from the Treaty Number 9 Attawapiskat, which stands for People of the Parting Rocks First Nation. He is an activist and field work in the sector of 2S and LGBTQIA+ human rights, HIV advocacy. He spoke at the UN level on political declaration on HIV and restrictive and punitive drug policy. Love to welcome you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I am there. I try to tell people my spirit is kind of everywhere that transcends physical stuff, so it counts. I guess we'll go ahead and introduce yourself. You did such a wonderful job. So, ani nabi mishkaki indigenous cause makwado demnin dao ara piskat and donjaba. My spirit name is Nabi Mishkaki, which translates to water medicine, and my chosen name is Skylar. Like I was already introduced, my family is from Arapiskat First Nation, people of the Parting Rocks, known as Treaty Number 9, which is along the James Bay, Hudson Bay area. It is a flying community, so it is very much isolated. And has the highest rates for youth suicide rates in Ontario. And there's a lot of housing crisis issues that are going on, as well as not access to clean drinking water or bathing water as well. I go by he, him, and they, them pronouns, and I identify as two-spirit and trans, and I'm also very neurodivergent, so I've got ADHD, and my brain is going 100 miles a minute. I just want to say chimigwich to everybody for allowing me to be in this space with you all, and being invited to speak. I feel very honored, and from the depths and bottom of my heart. I just got my tooth extracted, so I apologize if my talking is kind of like all over the place. I'm trying to talk, but I have a gap, so I'm trying to figure this out. But yeah, so thank you for your patience. When it comes to thinking about my activism journey and when did it start, I really couldn't even find or pinpoint an exact date or time. I think that my activism journey really started through my own lived experiences. So, as a young child who was Indigenous, and with interracial trauma, residential schools, colonialism, assimilation, I was part of that product of it and enforced within it beyond my own consent because I was a young child. So I was put in the child welfare system and at 1 years old and was adopted by age 4, but grew up in a very westernized household environment. And I really struggled with sense of identity of who I am, where do I actually come from? Like when you're just looking around being like, where's my mom? Where's my dad? Like it sounds dark, but it's true. I just didn't have connection to my family, my birth family. So I think that was a lot of trauma in and of itself. And so I think it was fair for myself to ask those deeper questions about who am I and what the heck am I even doing? And so through that, through my youngness and my youthhood, I was dealing with a lot of trauma. and I didn't have the sense of normalcy where I could go to school and just attend school and just chill and, have like this healthy relationship at home where I could go home and feel safe. I felt very much like isolated and didn't really have a safe place to just be who I am. And I also didn't have pieces of myself that I could identify with yet because colonialism had stolen that from me without my own consent, without my choice. So I dealt with a lot of suicidal ideations and self-harming and eating disorders growing up, especially in my youthhood. I still look like I'm like 17. I'm 27 now, but I'm talking more when I was between the ages 15 to, I'd say, around 19 to be specific. And eventually I ended up coming out as transgender, and I also identify as two-spirit, and there's different ways of understanding that in my own journey. And unfortunately, I was given the ultimatum to either get out of the house or stop transitioning and just be what what my adoptive family had wanted me to live as in their own regard, and faced a lot of extremely hardcore microaggressions. And so when I came out as trans, I decided, what am I going to do? So I decided, for my own mental health sake and because I love myself, that I would like to leave the house so that I could be who I was. And of course, like, it seems so simple, but it was not simple. There was a lot of chaotic mess that came with that. I ended up in Toronto in forms of homelessness and deeply in poverty, where I was walking outside in the winter, couldn't even have $3 to afford a bus token for the streetcar or the bus in Toronto. And I ended up using drugs to cope with. I think of it for me at that time, my relationship to drugs, because my relationship to drugs have changed, and I think it's important to acknowledge that people's relationship with drugs can change. It's not always linear. But at that time, my relationship to drugs was on a means of survival, and I don't have any regrets around that. I think, in fact, I needed that to thrive in some form of survival more than thriving. And I decided to work towards transitioning eventually in my life. I got to a point where I was finally working through that shame and that internalized feeling of shame around being who I was, and started to transition. And when I say transition, from for me, that was from female to male. And I started the process of hormone replacement therapy and eventually got surgery years later. And that is only one way of a version of someone transitioning. Each person will transition, and what that looks like for them in their own journey is their own. So I don't want to make it sound like all trans folks have to do HRT and have surgery. That's what I'm trying to say. Just want to make that clear from my heart, in the bottom of my heart. And through that, I ended up moving away, going to college for Indigenous specialization, social service work, and then I was able to meet elders. And that's when all, like, the way I see it is the stars and the ancestors lined it all up for me. So I was able to make connections, understand intergenerational trauma, and then I was able to reconnect with my birth family and recognize that my grandmother and my uncles and aunties actually attended residential school. They were residential school survivors. So I was able to put a lot of these pieces of my life that I didn't have answers to growing up, finally were starting to come together, which is a very powerful state to be in, and also very difficult. And it's a full-time job of healing work that I dedicated to my own life, because I wanted to see myself thriving instead of just surviving. That's what I wanted for myself. And eventually doors started opening for me. I got asked to speak at places. I don't even know. It kind of just happened is the best way I can describe it. And so I was very grateful for that. And in terms of advocacy and activism, it kind of is one of those things where it's tied into my professional career, but at the same time too, I make it very clear to people that I believe in intersectionality, and that we need to kind of deconstruct the colonial notions around professional versus personal versus this. And like, we have these extreme sides of black and white dualism of compartmentalize everything and somehow figure it out, which I extremely disagree with personally, because I'm a very intersectional person. So I started working front lines, doing grassroots low barrier work, working with Indigenous, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people who use drugs, who are living with HIV, and many different gender diversity experiences as well. And so I always approach things with intersectionality, because I understand that people are intersectional. They have various aspects to who they are that make up all of who they are. It's not just one little piece that I'm looking at within a person. And I've done a lot of work with Two-Spirit LGBTQ youth, adults, and families, facilitating circles with Two-Spirit Spirit Youth, facilitating youth programming, advocating for a lot of different various navigation, specifically through the emergency healthcare system, which is very problematic and still has a lot of work and ways to go, and informing youth on their rights around their gender identity and gender expression human rights code, which is part of Ontario. And a lot of folks didn't really know much about that. And so it was important to be able to give them the information so that they can have self-determination and self-autonomy. And I've worked with Indigenous folks who are incarcerated. There's one person particularly that I work with that was in the Treatment and Remand Center in Northern Ontario. And they just the system itself did not want me to get in there to see the person face to face, so they were continually either not answering my phone calls, ignoring my voicemails, or just shutting down the conversations. And I basically just didn't give up. I just said nope, and I kept calling and calling, and I kept saying I want to speak to your supervisor, and I just kept going and going. And eventually I was finally able to go in person, because I guess they realized I wasn't going to stop anyways, so they're like, I guess we'll let you come in. And I came in person and got to meet that person face to face, and I was able to work with them in a whole different capacity. But that was a lot of barriers that I had to go through as an individual worker to ensure that this person was seeing somebody face to face and not just in between and through people within that system and structure. And then after I transitioned to doing frontline harm reduction work, which I'm very passionate about, I ended up working in a national capacity, and I've worked on reserve, which is very different as well. And on reserve particularly, I really was advocating for us to talk about Indigenous people living with HIV and Indigenous harm reduction. And of course, there's a lot of, within communities, it's hard to explain in English language, but because of colonialism and assimilation, there's extremely complex issues that arise within those community contexts. But I really made it a point to ensure that we're talking about it and to bring it forward so that community members knew that we were there and that we're supporting and we see them and that we're honoring their existence as well, rather than continuing to be discriminatory and stigmatizing people's lived realities and experiences. So that was something that I really pushed for. And I think changes happened after I left a couple months later, because like the other individual speaker is saying, planting seeds, and sometimes those seeds bloom after you're gone. So it's not that you didn't do something magical or you didn't contribute to the plant growing, but rather you're planting the little seeds. And sometimes that work comes to fruition later, and we're not always around to see it, but we can hear about it and feel it in our spirit too. And then nationally, I've been advocating for Indigenous people living with HIV, hepatitis C, STBBIs, Indigenous harm reduction, and multiple layers of intersectional experiences on a national level with a national Indigenous organization. And then I'm now moved towards more policy development because I'm very passionate about policies, and I'm in school for political science, minoring in Anishinaabe studies. And I have two full-time jobs where I do policy work and full-time school, and I do stuff out on the outside as well, like speaking and things like that. So I'm a very busy bee. And yeah, and I just want to give a quick shout out real quick if I have time, hopefully, to a few individual people that have helped me throughout my activism or my journey as a whole. So Trevor Stratton, Renee Boucher, Nick Boyce, Christian Hoy, Patricia Lesage, Tina Rowe, Stephen Larange, Jessica Demare, Colin Johnson, and many others. These are individuals who have inspired me in the work that I do and have really empowered me to keep going, and saw something in me that maybe I couldn't see in myself as I developed and as I grew as an individual person, as I did the healing work as well. And some of the challenges, or something that I wanted to share too with activism as a whole, is that there is no one way or best way to do activism or advocacy. And it's important that we recognize that all advocates out there who may not have privilege of being able to speak at events such as today, I want to just recognize that each person will have their own connection to advocacy and activism that they do, and that every person doing this work adds up to a larger picture for the future generations. And one of the biggest challenges I faced in advocacy is the exhaustion of coming up against large systemic barriers that can feel like metal walls sometimes. And it's really important to, remember that. How do I explain it in the best terms? But yes, there are these larger systemic issues that feel like metal walls, and it can be heavy. And I think it's important to be transparent that activism isn't always this romanticized, it's great all the time thing. It is phenomenal, it's beautiful, it's empowering, it's important, and at the same time too, it's messy, and it can be painful, and it can be isolating sometimes, and it can be exhausting. And I think it's important to be like human about it. You know what I mean? So I think that one of the successes I would say is seeing changes happen, even if they happen a few years later or months later, later, and also making connections with other like-minded individuals who care about the things that you care about as well, and connecting spirit to spirit so that that work is done in a meaningful, compassionate, loving way. And I think too, one of the biggest key things I'll say to kind of to finish off is that, as someone with a lot of lived experience, I think it's important to note that not everybody involved in activism or advocacy who are allies necessarily, like, sometimes we have to still be our own. I call myself my own lawyer. I'm constantly my own lawyer in a way, constantly advocating for my rights to health and all these other things. So even though outside my activism work, in my lived realities, I'm still having to fight for my rights on an ongoing everyday basis, basically. So it's important to note that that switch that people say turning off is not as simple, but it's important that we take care of ourselves and have healthy boundaries, and kind of come to learn and have self-awareness of what our limits are for us, so that we can take care of ourselves and we're not pouring from like an empty cup, so to speak. I think it's important to have compassion for yourself and know that, um, that you're doing the work, and that's important, and also to take time for you to, flourish and rejuvenate your soul and your spirit, whatever that might look like for you. For me, as an Indigenous person, I've done ceremonies for a lot of community members I lost to overdose. I actually had long hair at one point, and I cut it off, symbolically through ceremony to honor the lives that had passed on. So there's little things that each of us do that work for us. So trying to find that for yourself, within yourself, is a really key point. And to know that it's messy and it's not always as simple as it's the best thing ever. It's powerful, but it can be messy, and it's okay to have emotions and feel frustrated sometimes. It's human to have those experiences. That's all I'll say for now. I don't know if I'm at my 8 minutes or not, but I appreciate, the time and space, and thank you so much.
That have come in, but we'll save them for the end and get through to getting them together. A lot that you said has really resonated a lot with a lot of our virtual attendees who have submitted a lot of questions, and we'll really cover those because it seems like a lot of the questions that have been coming in overlap. But we're moving on. We're moving on next to Barbara Kemigiza, a Ugandan HIV activist who is living with HIV. She uses her tool to inspire, engage, motivate, mentor young people living with HIV in her community. Barbara has come up with very unique ways to talk about HIV. Some that we've seen now have become very common, but in a very unique Barbara way. This is like wearing HIV branded apparel, t-shirts. One that really caught my attention was using empty ARV bottles as household products and trying to make it become an everyday part of life. She has personally immobilized 300 young people living with HIV in the Hoima district. Barbara is here with us virtually on chat, but because we knew about the internet connection situation, we thought of making sure that was pre-recorded, but Barbara's going to be here for question answers and as well here to answer any questions. So Barbara, we'll play the video, and then Barbara will be here for the question answer.
Hi everyone, my name is Barbara Kemigisa. I'm an HIV activist living with HIV from Hoima in Uganda. Well, I'm really excited to be here, to be speaking to you, and I just hope my story inspires someone tonight, this morning, and I'm grateful to No Time to Wait for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Well, what can I say? So many things, but my story begins when I'm just a little girl at 6 years old. My uncle started having sex with me, and this was more like a game. So I grew up having sex as a game. So I didn't know the dangers, I didn't know what could happen. So in school, by 15, I had multiple sexual partners, and I was pregnant. So one time my family comes, takes me out of school, and terminates my pregnancy at 8 months. Just imagine, today you leave school with a very big stomach, and the next day you return with an empty stomach. It was really tough for me because the friends that used to talk to me, that we used to go out with, none of them really wanted to associate with me. So I felt so alone. That's the very first time in my life I realized everything I was doing was extremely bad. At home, they looked at me as this girl who was just having sex with anyone, but it's because they couldn't know what was happening, because I never really had a relationship with my parents. They would leave early in the morning for work and return late in the evening for, and I ended up living life myself. When I got so frustrated and depressed, I just ran away from home to the streets of Kampala. Later on, I got pregnant again, and this time around, I tested HIV positive. On the day I tested HIV positive, I realized I was not the things people said people living with HIV were. I wasn't going to die. I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel incapacitated in any way. So I just wanted to change the story. I decided in my heart I was going to change the face of HIV in Uganda, but also that HIV stops with me. So today, I must say I did my job. I went out really talking about HIV. I was crazy to change the narrative. I would wear HIV positive messages. If someone said something negative, like if someone called me a rotten avocado or a walking dead body, the next day you'd see me wearing rotten avocado on my t-shirt. Reason being, I've learned to find positivity out of negativity. I remember the day I was called a rotten avocado. I looked around and I'm like, what can come out of rotten avocado? And I realized for it to make avocado oil, the avocado has to first get rotten. So I realized, oh, oil can come out of me. So I wore that word with so much pride, but people would plead with me to take it down because I looked really good and healthy. So it kept on building my esteem, but also cheering me on to do what I was doing to inspire other young people. I went to schools, I went to churches, and behold, I started traveling outside my country just to share my story. So I started moving to different communities and telling young people, you know what? Don't look at your life right now and think it's the end of you. No, I'm a living testimony that if you don't give up on yourself, if you choose to use your story for something positive, you never know how far it can take you. So that has really changed my life, much as it has changed other people's lives. Along the way, because of community service, because of the people I had talked to, I started getting so many young people in my life. I was renting a very small room, but there are times when you find me with over 10 kids in my house. Like sometimes they'll spend a night. I live in a community where people are desperate, like for help, for hope, for so many things. So I'd have these people, and then I started recycling ARV bottles. So I would have flower vases, I'd have stacks of bottles at the house. So I ended up being evicted most of the times by the landlords. So all this was really frustrating, but I never wanted to give up my dream. So when COVID happened, I decided to use the little money I had saved to go to the rural area because I knew it was easier to start life there. I built a small house with just 3 rooms, and here I knew I had the freedom to do anything. So in Hoima, I started with only 4 young people, and within 1 year, I had 30 young people. But then, as I continued working in health facilities, right now I have 300 young people in different peer support groups. But the sad part is that most of the young people living with HIV have dropped out of school, but also they have very bad relationships with their families, and most of them have single parents, like single mothers. When the mothers test positive, their husbands chase them away and they neglect them with the positive children. This has really been tough. It is sad looking at a young girl selling her body, like just to get money, just to buy a pad, just because she wants to come to the center to enjoy peer interaction with others. In the rural area, we don't have transport systems, so you find that someone has to walk over 20 kilometers to just go look for treatment. We get a list of young people to follow up, and you find you have a list of over 500 young people who are no longer coming to receive their treatment. It's overwhelming that we don't have any youth centers, and those that are available don't have the tools, the equipment. There's no sports arena. There's literally nothing. I'm in a community where I feel I'm starting from zero, and honestly, it is overwhelming. I can't do this alone. I'm glad that I'm part of the ICW global community, but also love positive women. And with this, I've been able to just do a number of activities with these young people. Sometimes I give them transport refund, and that transport refund takes care of something. Last day I had Love Positive Women on Valentine's Day, where I had 20 mothers and 20 young girls. I saw how they both urgently needed to cement their relationship. But again, their challenges are crossing up, are like are cross cutting, like from one community to another. But then I realized mothers are frustrated because they are given HIV by their partners, and now they are given the burden to raise their children on their own, and then the children grow up and become unruly, uncontrollable. So it was such a tight mix. So next year I want to try out something new. I want to do a Valentine's Day makeover for at least 100 women, mothers, and just give them a new feel. And with this new feel, at least get them a shoe, a dress, makeup, a photo shoot, and then a dinner where we can share all our stories and experiences together. So I don't know. I'm believing God that this can happen, and I really must say I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to having partners, people who have a passion for young people. Maybe you're out there, you have an organization, you have a group, you have a community, and you feel you can support a woman or a young person down in one of the rural areas. We are looking for someone that can just step in the gap. Maybe you can let go of a burger just one weekend, and like let that maybe contribute to a girl or a boy to keep in school, or let it dress up a woman on Valentine's Day. Thank you so much. I can't wait to hear from you. Comments, questions, whatever you have, and you feel you need me to talk more about it, I'll be more than willing. You can reach out in any way. I hope we'll be able to share our contacts with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for really promoting a safe, healthy, and empowered community, and really lessons that we can learn from each other, from the global south, and approaches that really apply to all of us, no matter where we're located in the world. And I think more than ever, COVID's really shown us that. And I think that really ties in back to our next and final member of this group, Tanaka Shirombo, Malawi's Adolescent Activist of the Year of 2020. He's a highly motivated young man, believes youth are the epicenter of global health. I'll move over just to make some space. He's also the board chair of the Global Network of Young People Living with HIV, Y+. He is one of the ICFC trailblazers, country level, next generation, currently is on the UNAIDS internship program at the Malawi country office. So happy to have you here. Thank you for coming all the way, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. It was even the introduction scared me a little bit. So it's a great pleasure to come all the way to also join this very good conference, where I see sharing experience is very vital. It also gives tips to others on how best they can maneuver around in the HIV sector. So for me, the way I started, I actually never thought I would be an advocate in the first place. So the way I ended up in the advocacy space is I hated going monthly to the hospital to collect my medication. So somehow these people read my mind that, okay, he doesn't like coming to the hospital. So they gave me a deal. They're like, if we give you 4 months supply, you should come mentor the young people in the teen clubs. So we have this teen club model. Then I was like, okay, this deal looks very, it's appetizing. I get to stay home for 4 months, not going to the hospital. In return, I only have to free one Saturday of mine to mentor the kids. Then I was like, okay, let me give this a try. Then I went to the teen club I was like, okay, let me see what's actually going on. So when I actually went there, I found 300 kids. I'm like, wow, this is a lot. Yes, I do public speaking, I represent the country, but then 300 kids living with HIV is a lot. And then what even sparked more interest was the fact that out of that 300 kids, when I was 17, I think I was an undergrad, I was going to start first year in university. Out of that 300 kids, only 2 were in university. And I was like, okay, wow, now this is a serious issue now. So my interest started from there. And then upon doing the mentorship for like a month, I was promoted to like a senior mentor now. So as a senior mentor, so I was in charge of looking at other mentors. So I did a whole program where each mentor was assigned to a child, because I wanted them to be following up on each and every child, their attendance, their viral load count, everything like that. So I found out that there were about 40 kids who were HIV, like their viral load was very high. So I specifically took a case where this girl had 2 million copies per milliliter as a viral count, because I was like, okay, this is too serious. I need to, go down in depth to find out what is the main problem. So I started going about to ask that single index case. So I found out that her mother was in denial of her HIV status. So she decided to hide the medicine so that her and the daughter can all die at the same time. And then she actually passed away. But then now the daughter was remaining, but the father did not know that his daughter is also HIV positive. So now I had to find the father, disclose to him, and try to ensure that at least the viral load should drop. So my whole advocacy career started from when she passed away, because the time that kid passed away, her viral load was 5,000 copies. So it kept on hitting my mind. I'm like, I helped her move from 2 million to 5,000, and she still died. And then I kind of vouched myself that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I need to find more cases like this so that we can try reduce HIV-related deaths.
And how old were you?
Oh, right now?
No, how old were you when
by then I was 17. So then I was 17. Then I started a regional movement to track down defaulters. So by the end of that year, we had tracked down about 240 people and brought them back to care. So an organization in my city saw the work I was doing. They were like, okay, no, we like what you're doing. Can you come manage our project? So we wrote a proposal with them at the end of it all. And then the IAS, the International AIDS Society, gave me a grant, $10,000 to try implement a differentiated care model of ART delivery. So out of that model, I looked at what we had on the proposal. It was the same interventions will always come up. Let's address stigma, but the creativity in it wasn't there, because I was looking at these people are failing to access HIV services. I am a mentor. I can go to the hospital. They will treat me nice because they know what I do. But then I looked at this girl who doesn't know anyone at the clinic. How best can we assist that person? So I called for a meeting where everyone should sit there, and I asked them, how do you want your care to be provided to you? So the key 3 things I noticed from them, they said they don't want anyone old in the hospital. They want a young person who, if they see, they'll be able to tell them anything they want. And then they wanted rewards for the people who were following their adherence was 100%, like a sort of fast track window for them. And the third one, they wanted it to happen on Saturdays, separate from the adult clinic. So what I planned, what I did is I went to the district health office, and you already know old people, so it was very hard to convince them that they have to remove the current staff nurses from the clinic and then put in younger ones. So the closest we got to the dream picture they wanted was they rotated the roster. So they tried to find young nurses in the current roster to put them into the ART clinic. But at least it helped in the sense that now the attendance moved from 300 to about 600. So now they are even to divide the teen club that, okay, at least 15 to 20 come on this day, 20 to 24 come on another day. So it's from my work with the International AIDS Society, that's when I applied to be part of the Y Plus Global, what Tinashe was talking about. So I joined Y Plus Global in 2020 as a regional representative for Eastern and Southern Africa. So that's when I joined. Then I became the board chair at the age of 24. That's when I became the board chair for the global network of young people living with HIV. Then I've done some work with the global network of young people living with HIV, which ended me in the organizing committee of the AIDS conference, which happened in Montreal in August. That was August, month end of July and August. And then the most challenge I would say I've faced in my advocacy career is you tend to find people holding tight to their spaces, because advocacy is all about power shifting. You have to convince someone that what you're telling them can improve the results. And when you're going to that person already has their own idea that they want to push. So for you to move them from point A to point B, it requires a lot of persuasion and a lot of time, which a lot of young people don't have the time. And then advocacy, most people have to understand it's a process. An advocacy move cannot happen in a month or less than that. But even if you're to advocate, let's say, I'll give an example of a recent advocacy piece I was part of. We wanted tax-free sanitary pads in the country. So we went to Parliament, we presented it to them that we want you to remove the tax off. We got shouted. We didn't give up. We went back again. Now this time we changed. We went ourselves. We got in some parliamentarians. But if you can imagine, that took us 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, they still said no. But then when they're saying the national budget, we're all surprised to hear they've removed the tax. And then we're like, oh, okay, they listened to us actually. So you can imagine how long that actually took. But for us, that they listened to us, they even gave us a no. It was an achievement because at least we moved from point A to point B. So that whole power shifting is another problem I've faced. And then another problem is, I would say, in terms of a lot of young people, how would the stance, how would I call it, in terms of power? Let's say you might have an idea, like I did an advocacy piece where I was showing the disparities in youth support, which ended up the people I was addressing, they blocked my Facebook account. They sent their lawyers. So actually my Facebook account right now is already limited because I had to appeal for that. I'll be like, okay, you guys are actually blocking my freedom of expression. So right now it's a little bit limited, but at least I can post, I can express something. But then those are the sort of problems I've faced. And as you can also, from the previous panel, they talked of funding. That funding is also another issue for young people to access capacity building sessions. I'll stop from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I really wanted to before I go on to the next part, which is just questions, discussions, I really wanted to thank Jessica, Barbara, Skylar, and Tanaka for taking time to share your stories. As a young activist myself and someone, I can relate that making waves or moving mountains is not an easy process. Some of the questions that have come in, this session has gotten a lot of virtual attention. It seems like there's a lot of viewership international for this session that has really resonated, saying that it's really a power struggle. And one of the questions came on was, have you ever experienced a dilemma in a project? And that's the first part of the question for all three of you, because Barbara is just chatting in. But one was a specific part of it for Tanaka to answer, and I'd like all three of you to share the time, is you talked about being 17 when you helped this person with their viral load. How were you received as a young activist, and what tips do you have for young people who want to collaborate? So the first part is experiencing a dilemma in a collaborative project, and the second part is around being a young activist and tips of wanting to contribute. So we'll start probably Tanaka, and then Skylar and Barbara will read on.
Okay, so I feel like I've faced a dilemma where I was involved in a project only to find out that they were trying to use me so that they can get. So they came to me. They're like, we have an app where we want young people living with HIV to give their opinions. They have their mental health. They can talk to someone. But then I sat down and I'm like, how can it be that easy? These people just come, and then I asked them, send me your concept note. So in our country, there's this phrase, they say, if you want to go around young people, send them a document with 40 pages. They'll only read the first page and then the last page. But then the twist of the document, put it probably page 30 something or 40 something. Then I remembered that line, and then that's when I read the whole concept to only notice that the young people living with HIV were only put as the project targets, but not as partners. Then I was like, now this is different, because we're discussing as partners. And then I had to quit the whole partnership because I felt like it put us to a disadvantage, because we need to move away from being beneficiaries to partners, because we're talking about greater involvement of young people living with HIV. And I was accepted easily because, you know, with people, I believe in, if you can't make a person smile in one day, you're never going to, you know, easily do that over years, like when you go beyond that. So whenever I go to a teen club, I always smile, whether regardless the health provider gives me an attitude, I'll still persist, and I'll still ask the questions. And you know, whenever I'm confused about viral load, I'll still go back to them and still ask the same thing, that please explain it to me. I need to understand this. And then I have a public health background, which also helps me to, you know, to understand these things much better.
Yeah, and Skylar, what about you on these thoughts?
Well, for me, I think about all the barriers that have come up when doing any projects, collaborations. Like, there's lots of things that are involved in, so I don't even know like a specific, but most of the time it's about being an Indigenous youth and not being taken seriously in communities, because there's often this, like, from colonialism, unfortunately, it's deeply ingrained and embedded within our communities. And so unfortunately, a lot of times youth, our voices are shut out, or we're seen as not having much knowledge because we're in the young stage of our journey of life. So therefore we don't have much to contribute, you know what I mean? And so one of the things that I often say, and then people are always like, you know, is I think of it like this. When we remove colonialism and we just take a second to just be in our hearts and our spirit for a second, you know, when I'm speaking, I'm not just speaking as Skylar the Vimishkaki. My grandmother's speaking through me. My grandfather's speaking through me. My ancestors are speaking through me. And it's important for us to remember that when youth are speaking, they're not just speaking from themselves. They might be speaking as well with the ancestral connections that they have tied to their lineage. And so it's important for us to remember that when they are speaking, that we actively listen, not just with our ears, but with our heart and with our spirits, because there's a difference between the two. So I think that's something that often Indigenous youth have to fight for us to be heard and seen and taken seriously, and that we only lived a very short part of our life, thus we don't have much knowledge that we carry in what we call our bundle, which I like to kick the walls down and say, absolutely not. You know, I've lived through a lot. As for a 27-year-old, what I've been through is like probably what some people may not even go through in their whole lifetime. And it's not about being better or worse. It simply is understanding that piece. And then tokenization is another thing that I want to point out is a real thing. Tokenization is very real. So we need people to be meaningful and transparent in why they're trying to engage us.
So we're running close on short on time, but I still want to get in one last question before we wrap up. And it's actually a valid one, especially with the theme being and the conference being called No Time to Wait. The question is, what is one thing you're going to do we can do right now to achieve the mission of no more new youth HIV infections? What is one thing you can do right now to achieve the conference mission of no new youth HIV infections? It's from Kath.
Okay, so for me, one thing I can do right now is share a lot about this conference so that others that are out there that don't have access to come to such a conference might also get information about it. And then I'm pretty sure they would also have access to information about prevention of HIV, and then also how to contain HIV in such a way will be helping others to contribute to reduction of new HIV infections. That's what I would do immediately.
And Skylar?
I'm the type of person that I think there's feedback, so I sorry. But I typically like to reflect on things, so I feel like my spirit can't answer this like full-fledged, but generally speaking, I think it has to, for as Indigenous perspective, needs to be happening in our communities internally, doing the work. So talking about HIV in our communities, within ceremonies, within roles, responsibilities, there's just far too much isolation and stigma and discrimination in our communities, and nobody wants to talk about it, and it's constantly swept under the rug. So for me, that's where I see myself fitting in the vision of it. But there's so much more I could do, and I just try to do what I can and do the most that I can with care and with intention and thought. But that's one thing for me, is that I want to see this, that Indigenous people with HIV are no longer being isolated from their communities, and that they are seen and cared for and loved, and that we don't have to keep sweeping this under the rug, because that's it's very harmful, very, very harmful. And to me, it's violent.
Thank you all. Thank you for taking the time to speak on this topic. And before we conclude about this session, I just wanted to remind everyone that we're each making waves in our own way. Doesn't need to be not saying anything about working at the UNAIDS or other groups, but each of our little bits of telling a bit about HIV, about telling others about support networks, learning about PrEP, those little bits are making waves, and they are moving mountains, and they're making topics about HIV more accessible and inclusive. So everyone in this room is making waves, and I think this is why this is such a resonating topic for young people. So I wanted to thank everyone for attending this session, for being here and engaged with this. I see that there was a lot of virtual and in-person interest, and we will love to keep this conversation going on online and on the chat. Before we head into break, there's one little housekeeping thing to let everyone know. Let's Stop AIDS will be hosting, as being attendees at No Time to Wait, we are hosting a party here tonight called Intersection. We, believe it or not, will be transforming this space into a nightclub. It will have a fair bit of individuals. It's close to being sold out, so each of you are as well allowed to attend, and you'll learn more about that. I don't know if our AV guys, if there's any reel tapes that was used on social that they could show. Tonight, so much, and I think we'll move on to the next part. It's actually a fun part. It's a break, it's a warm-up, it's to get your blood flowing, and I think there's a B-roll for it. So thank you so much.